Welcome to Become Masculine, a channel about building the discipline, strength, confidence, and self-control to become a better man.
Glad to be here for this one.
So guys, what if the difference between a Fortune 500 CEO, an Olympic gold medalist, and just, the average guy on the street has absolutely nothing to do with raw talent?
Right, like what if it's not about being born gifted?
Exactly. What if it's not about luck, and it certainly isn't about grinding 24/7 until you physically collapse?
Which is what everyone tells you to do, right? The whole hustle culture thing.
Yeah, but today, we're unpacking the psychology of peak performance. We want to understand the actual mental operating system of the top 1%.
It really is a totally different operating system.
It is. We are looking at the blueprints for rewiring your own brain for extraordinary achievement, because you don't have to stay stuck with the hardware you currently have.
Yeah, when you look at the habits and the biology of elite performers, the most striking realization is that, well, they don't leave their mental development to chance.
They don't just hope they get smarter or tougher.
No, they engineer it. And the foundation of that engineering relies on a biological mechanism we all possess, which is neuroplasticity.
Right, neuroplasticity. This is a huge concept for us to grasp.
It's massive. We tend to operate under the assumption that our brains are basically, fixed by the time we reach adulthood.
Like, you get what you get.
Exactly. We think our baseline intelligence or our capacity to handle a really stressful Tuesday at the office is just the hand we were dealt.
I think a lot of guys feel that way, like, I'm just an anxious person, or I'm just not good under pressure.
But the reality completely dismantles that. Every single thought you repeatedly have and every skill you deliberately practice, it physically sculpts the structure of your brain.
So wait, we aren't just talking about, like, adopting a positive mindset here. We're talking about changing the actual physical hardware inside our skulls.
Very literally. I mean, when neuroscientists put elite performers into fMRI machines, they see entirely different physical architectures compared to an average control group.
Wow, so their brains actually look different on a scan.
Yeah, the neural pathways responsible for focus, pattern recognition, and emotional regulation, they are physically thicker. They have more density.
Because they've basically been lifting weights with those specific parts of their brain.
Exactly.
Yeah.
These guys have engaged in years of cognitive cross-training, which literally alters how their brains route information.
I want to dig into a specific example of that routing, because there's this concept called the default mode network, or the DMN. And I find this incredibly relatable for any guy trying to improve himself.
Oh yeah, the DMN is a game changer once you understand it.
If neuroplasticity is the hardware, the DMN seems to be the brain's screensaver.
Yeah.
It's what your mind defaults to when you are just standing in line for coffee.
Or staring out a window or driving in silence when you're not actively focusing on a task.
That is a perfect way to frame it. The default mode network activates during those passive moments. So for the vast majority of guys out there, what does that screensaver actually look like?
Honestly, it's usually a chaotic, stressful news ticker.
Yeah. It's replaying an awkward conversation you had with your boss 5 years ago.
Or spinning up anxiety about a meeting tomorrow. Or just, this general low-level sense of unease.
Right. And maintaining that anxious mental chatter, it requires a massive amount of metabolic energy, doesn't it?
It does. You are constantly burning cognitive fuel just to exist in your baseline state. You're exhausting yourself before the day even really begins.
So what does the elite mind do differently with their screensaver?
Well, through deliberate practice, whether that's mindfulness, visualization, or cognitive behavioral techniques, they actually train their DMN to default to a state of relaxed awareness.
Relaxed awareness. I like that phrase.
Yeah, so when they are at rest, their brain is calm, yet highly alert. It's not spinning its wheels.
Which means they have a full battery when it's time to actually do the work.
Precisely. This allows them to subconsciously process patterns and recognize opportunities without draining their cognitive battery.
That makes me wonder about how they process negative inputs, though. Like, if their screensaver is calm, what happens when a massive crisis actually hits?
Right, because bad things still happen to elite performers.
Exactly. There's a huge hardware difference in how elites process failure and discomfort compared to the average guy, right?
It all comes down to how the brain routes stress signals. When an average person experiences a severe setback, say a failed product launch or getting dumped or losing a big game, the sensory input is heavily routed through the amygdala.
And the amygdala is basically the brain's emotional threat detection center, right?
Yep. The failure triggers a biological alarm. It feels like a literal threat to their survival or to their identity as a man.
Right, so the internal narrative immediately becomes highly emotional. Like, I am a failure, I am an imposter, I'm just not good enough.
And once you're caught in that emotional loop, you're essentially paralyzed.
Because you can't fix the actual problem if you're too busy defending your fragile ego.
Exactly. But elite performers have conditioned their neural pathways to bypass that intense amygdala response. They route setbacks primarily through the prefrontal cortex instead.
The prefrontal cortex, that is the rational, logical, analytical part of the brain, right?
Get it. By processing failure logically rather than emotionally, they strip away the threat to their identity. To them, the failure is simply interpreted as data. It's just feedback.
Just data. Man, that's a completely different biological reaction.
It changes everything.
Because if failure is just data, you extract the lesson, you make the adjustment, and you move on. You don't carry all that heavy emotional baggage that weighs you down.
And eventually, you actually start to seek out discomfort because you realize that's where the highest quality data lives.
That biological advantage really sets the stage for everything else. Because once your hardware is optimized to handle stress and remain calm, you can start running highly complex software.
Let's talk about that software then.
Yeah, if neuroplasticity and the DMN upgrade the physical wiring, how do these top-tier guys actually process the massive amounts of data required to make high-stakes decisions?
This is where we get into mental models.
Mental models. I feel like this is a term that gets thrown around a lot, but let's break it down for the guys listening.
Sure. So a mental model is simply a cognitive framework that helps you interpret reality. It simplifies complexity and reveals the underlying structure of a problem.
Give me an example to ground this.
Okay, think of a novice chess player. They look at the board, and their brain has to calculate the potential movement of every single individual piece. It's exhausting, and they miss things.
Right, they're just looking at the knight and the bishop completely isolated.
Exactly. But a grandmaster doesn't see individual pieces. They see established patterns, weaknesses, and systems. They see the whole board as a single flowing entity.
So mental models are essentially the grandmaster patterns for real life.
That's a great way to put it. One of the models that elite performers lean on heavily is first principles thinking.
First principles thinking. We hear this in Silicon Valley a lot, with guys like Elon Musk. But the actual mechanics of it are really fascinating.
They really are. Instead of looking at how things have always been done or relying on analogies, you actively strip a problem down to its most fundamental, undeniable truths.
Right, it's physical or logical base layer.
Yeah, and then you build your solution up from there. You are basically refusing to accept conventional wisdom.
Because conventional wisdom is usually just what average people have settled on.
Exactly. It's the ultimate antidote to lazy, dogmatic thinking. Another really critical model is called inversion.
Inversion. I love this one. Usually when we tackle a goal, we ask, how do I achieve this?
Right, which makes sense on the surface. But inversion forces you to look at the exact opposite. You ask, what are all the specific ways this project could completely fail?
You essentially try to bankrupt your own idea before you even launch it.
Yes. Say you want to get into the best physical shape of your life. Instead of asking how to do it, you ask, how could I guarantee that I get fat and weak this year?
Right. And the answer is, well, I'd sleep 4 hours a night, I'd eat fast food every day, and I would never lift heavy things.
Exactly. By imagining the absolute disaster scenarios first, you can reverse engineer strategies to avoid those exact pitfalls.
Yeah.
You spot the hidden landmines because you actively went looking for them.
And when you combine that with probabilistic thinking, which is basically stopping this habit of viewing the world in black and white certainties, you start assigning likelihoods to outcomes.
Right. You stop thinking this will definitely work or this will definitely fail, and you start thinking this has an 80% chance of success. It creates an incredibly robust decision-making engine.
I am struggling to reconcile something here, though, man. Running first principles thinking, or inversion, sounds great if you're sitting in a quiet, isolated cabin in the woods.
Right, with all the time in the world.
Exactly. But let's look at the reality of a modern workday for the guys listening. You have Slack notifications exploding, emails piling up, your phone is buzzing in your pocket, and you have 3 urgent fires to put out before lunch.
It's chaos.
We hear so much about how multitasking is terrible, and we should be monotasking. But is monotasking actually practical in today's world? Or is it just a luxury for people who don't have demanding jobs?
It's a completely valid pushback. The modern world is chaotic, but elite guys don't ignore the chaos. They reframe how to handle it through cognitive load optimization.
Cognitive load optimization.
Yeah.
Okay, what does that mean in practice?
Well, first we have to dispel the myth of multitasking. It is the belief that the brain can process two complex cognitive tasks simultaneously.
Which it can't, right?
It physically cannot. What your brain actually does is task switch rapidly back and forth.
And there is a biological cost to that rapid switching, isn't there?
Yeah.
I've heard it called attention residue.
Attention residue, exactly. When you are writing a complex proposal and you quickly glance over at an urgent email, your brain doesn't just neatly close the file on the proposal and open the email.
It's not like minimizing a window on your laptop.
No, it leaves a cognitive tab open. When you switch back to the proposal, a percentage of your working memory is still subconsciously processing that email.
Man, that residue acts like a massive cognitive drag.
It does. If you do that 50 times a morning, your prefrontal cortex is completely exhausted by lunch.
Yeah.
You have no willpower left.
So how do the elites handle the Slack messages and the daily fires if they aren't multitasking? Because they still have companies to run.
They handle it by heavily protecting their deep attention as a finite, exhaustible resource. They don't try to just power through the chaos all day, they compartmentalize it.
So they set boundaries.
Ruthless boundaries. They offload routine decisions wearing similar clothes, eating the same meals, automating administrative tasks.
Removing the friction.
Right. And when they do engage in deep problem solving, they utilize ultradian rhythms.
Ultradian rhythms.
Yeah.
Break that down for us.
These are naturally occurring biological cycles, typically around 90 minutes long. They will engage in 90 minutes of intense, unbroken focus, followed by a mandatory period of disengagement.
So they treat focus like a sprint, not a marathon.
Exactly. You sprint for 90 minutes, then you recover. You don't try to jog at a mediocre pace for 8 hours straight while checking Instagram.
Okay, that clarifies it. You aren't pretending the chaotic world doesn't exist. You're just batching the chaos into specific windows so you can protect your main asset, which is your deep attention.
That's exactly it.
But let's elevate the stakes here a bit.
Oh.
Because it's one thing to apply a mental model during a quiet 90-minute sprint at your desk. What happens when everything is truly on the line?
You mean high-stakes situations?
Yeah. A championship game, a board meeting that decides the fate of your company, a high-stakes negotiation, a moment where you can't just take a 90-minute break.
This is where we see the most dramatic separation between the elite man and the average man. We have to look at the biological response to intense pressure.
Walk us through that biology.
For the vast majority of human beings, high stakes trigger the threat response. It's the classic fight-or-flight mechanism. Your sympathetic nervous system floods your bloodstream with cortisol and adrenaline.
And the biological goal there is just pure physical survival, right?
Exactly. So your attention narrows dramatically, your fine motor skills degrade, and complex, nuanced thinking in that prefrontal cortex essentially shuts down.
Because your biology thinks you're about to be eaten by a bear, so it doesn't want you philosophizing about first principles. It wants you to run or punch something.
Precisely. But elite performers have conditioned themselves to experience a challenge response instead of a threat response.
A challenge response. How does that feel biologically?
The stress hormones still elevate, your heart still races, your palms might sweat, but they are accompanied by a completely different cocktail of neurochemicals, including DHEA, which is a hormone that actually helps the brain grow from stress.
Wow. So their body interprets the pressure not as a threat to their survival, but as a performance enhancer.
Yes. The pressure fuels heightened focus and faster reaction times. It biologically signals an opportunity for growth, not a signal of danger.
And mastering that challenge response seems to be the gateway to the absolute pinnacle of human performance, which is the flow state.
Flow state is the holy grail.
We've all heard of flow, right? That feeling where time seems to slow down, your execution becomes flawless, and everything just feels completely effortless.
Every athlete or high-level creative knows that feeling.
But the underlying neuroscience of flow is wild. It specifically points to a mechanism called transient hypofrontality.
Yeah, transient hypofrontality. Let's break that term down because it sounds completely counterintuitive to everything we've just discussed about logic and decision-making.
Yeah, please do.
Okay, so transient means temporary, hypo means less active, and frontality refers to the prefrontal cortex. So in a flow state, the most advanced, rational part of your brain is actually powering down.
Let me make sure I'm getting this, because it feels like a total paradox, man. We use the prefrontal cortex to rationally learn the skills during practice, but we have to turn it off to actually perform them at the highest level.
That is exactly what happens.
Is it kind of like turning off the microphone of a heckler in the audience of your own brain?
That is a brilliant analogy, yes. The
Hmm.
prefrontal cortex houses your inner critic. It's the voice that makes you second-guess yourself.
The voice that calculates the social consequences of failure. Like, what if I miss this shot and everyone laughs at me?
Right. It's the voice that worries about the future or regrets the past. When transient hypofrontality occurs, you literally pull the plug on that heckler. Self-consciousness completely vanishes.
Man, that sounds incredibly liberating.
It is. And once the heckler is muted, the raw, deeply ingrained skills you spent years physically hardwiring into your brain, through neuroplasticity, they can take over without any conscious interference.
So flow isn't some mystical, accidental blessing from the universe that just drops on you. If you understand the mechanics, you can engineer it.
You absolutely can. Elite guys use specific triggers to enter flow.
Like what?
One of the biggest ones is meticulously balancing the challenge to skill ratio.
Okay, explain that balance.
If the challenge of a task is too high for your current skill level, you just get overwhelmed by anxiety. You freeze. But if your skill is way higher than the challenge, you get bored. Your brain disengages.
So flow lives on that razor-thin edge right in the middle.
Exactly, where the task is just barely stretching the absolute limits of your current ability.
I'll trigger it.
They also require crystal clear, immediate goals and real-time feedback. You have to know exactly what you are trying to do, and you have to know immediately if what you are doing is working.
Which keeps your attention locked entirely in the present moment. You literally don't have the bandwidth to think about yesterday or tomorrow.
Right. But we have to be honest here. There is a massive biological cost to running your brain at maximum voltage, muting the heckler, and operating in a flow state.
Which brings us to perhaps the most counterintuitive finding we've come across. The idea that the best performers in the world are actually the best resters.
Yes. And this is a hard pill to swallow for a lot of ambitious guys. There is a deeply ingrained, almost toxic cultural narrative that taking a break is a sign of weakness.
Oh, 100%. We glorify the concept of sleep deprivation and the 24-hour grind. I'll sleep when I'm dead, all that stuff.
But the physiological data shows that grinding continuously without rest destroys long-term performance. It literally breaks your brain down. Elite performers operate on an entirely different paradigm.
Because they understand the concept of recovery debt, right?
Exactly. Recovery debt, if you continuously borrow from tomorrow's neurological energy to fund today's work, eventually the bill comes due.
And when it comes due, your cognitive performance will fall off an absolute cliff.
Yeah.
You burn out.
You crash hard.
It's hard to shake that guilt, though. I know for myself, man, if I step away from my desk in the middle of a busy afternoon to go for a 20-minute walk without my phone, part of my brain is screaming that I am losing ground to my competition.
It's a very common feeling.
How do elite guys actually shut that guilt off? Because I know they are hyper-competitive.
They shut the guilt off by understanding the actual neuroscience of what happens when they rest. They possess what researchers call recovery self-efficacy.
Recovery self-efficacy. So they believe in their rest.
They view recovery not as an absence of work or being lazy, but as a vital, non-negotiable technology for performance. When you are resting, your brain is doing the critical structural maintenance that is physically impossible to do while you are actively working.
We're talking about myelin development here, aren't we?
Yes, myelin is crucial. Myelin is a fatty tissue that wraps around the neural circuits in your brain. It acts like the rubber insulation on a copper electrical wire.
Okay, so it protects the signal.
It does more than protect it. The thicker the myelin, the faster and more efficiently electrical signals travel between your neurons. Memory consolidation, the strengthening of those new neural pathways we talked about, and the thickening of myelin, all of that happens during deep sleep and periods of profound cognitive rest.
Wait, so the improvement doesn't happen when I'm grinding at the desk or sweating in the gym?
No. Practice simply provides the stimulus. It sends the signal that adaptation is needed. But rest is when the actual physical adaptation occurs. If you don't rest, you don't adapt. You just break down.
That distinction between active and passive recovery is crucial too. Because guys will say, oh, I rested this weekend. But if I just did 4 hours of intense deep work, collapsing on the couch and scrolling through social media for an hour is not cognitive recovery, is it?
Not at all. You're just pumping more fragmented data, more dopamine spikes, and more cognitive load into an already tired brain.
Right, it's exhausting. True recovery requires giving your brain a complete break from processing new structured information. It means walking in nature, napping, meditating, or just sitting quietly.
which perfectly illustrates the difference between mere resilience and true anti-fragility.
Let's define those two because anti-fragility is a core concept for becoming a stronger man.
Resilience is basically bouncing back. It's like a rubber band. You stretch it under stress, and it snaps back to its original shape. You survive the stress, but you don't change.
Right, but anti-fragility is different.
Anti-fragility is like your muscular system or your immune system. You stress it, you break it down, and provided you give it adequate recovery, it grows back structurally stronger than it was before the stress.
Elite performers use that cycle. Intense flow state stress, followed by strategic, unapologetic recovery. And that cycle makes them fundamentally stronger year after year.
Exactly. They don't just endure the heavy weight, they let the heavyweight build their capacity.
So they're constantly breaking themselves down and building themselves up stronger. But how do they sustain the sheer discipline required for that over a lifetime?
It requires an insane amount of focus.
It does. I mean, we talk about this concept of obsessive optimization, the pursuit of marginal gains.
Yeah.
They focus on getting just 1% better every single day.
The math on that 1% rule is staggering, by the way.
It really is. A 1% daily improvement compounds to making you nearly 38 times better over a single year.
38 times better. Think about that.
But the average guy, he tries to overhaul his diet, his fitness, and his entire career all in one weekend, and he burns out by Tuesday. So how do the elites maintain that 1% optimization over a span of decades without quitting?
Yeah.
Where does the fuel come from?
It fundamentally comes down to how they view their ultimate trajectory in life. Early in their careers, the motivation is almost always personal achievement.
Right, proving themselves to the world, acquiring accolades, getting status or wealth, getting the nice car.
Sure, but if that remains your only motivation, eventually you will hit a wall. You win the championship, you get the promotion, you make the money. Then what?
You look around and say, is this it?
Exactly. That is exactly where late career burnout happens. Guys just lose their fire. To sustain obsessive optimization over a lifetime, elite performers undergo a profound psychological shift. It's known as legacy thinking.
Legacy thinking.
Yeah.
This is honestly the most surprising part of the whole psychology of peak performance for me. It completely flips the traditional narrative we are fed about success.
How so?
Well, we often picture the ultimate winner as this hyper-competitive, cutthroat individual who will step on anyone's neck to stay at the top. The lone wolf who only cares about number one.
The Hollywood version of success.
Right. But the data shows that true, enduring elite performance actually culminates in extreme generosity. It ends in service to others.
It is the ultimate paradox of the elite mind. At a certain point, they transition away from hoarding knowledge and chasing personal glory. They focus entirely on building systems, mentoring young guys, and creating value that will outlast them.
They prioritize the development of the people around them over their own continued personal achievement.
Exactly. And from a purely psychological standpoint, legacy thinking is the greatest motivation hack in existence.
Because it's bigger than you.
Yes. When you connect your tedious daily 1% efforts to a long-term impact that serves others and outlives you, you tap into an infinite well of fuel. You are no longer performing for the applause of today, you are performing for the future.
You elevate your purpose above your own ego, and that provides the emotional endurance needed to maintain all those rigorous mental models, the flow triggers, and the strict recovery protocols over a life scan.
Because you aren't doing it just for you anymore, you're doing it for the standard.
Man, this has been an incredibly dense journey through the mechanics of the mind. If we synthesize everything we've talked about today, the core truth is incredibly empowering for any guy listening.
It really puts the power back in your hands.
It does.
Correct.
The elite mind is not a genetic lottery ticket. Your brain is highly neuroplastic. The physical hardware can be consciously upgraded to route stress logically instead of emotionally.
You can thicken those neural pathways.
The software, the mental models like first principles and inversion, can be learned and applied to manage cognitive load. You can train yourself to trigger flow states, and you can build an anti-fragile biology through strategic rest.
It is an operating system, brother. And like any operating system, it can be installed. The barrier to entry isn't talent.
It's discipline.
Exactly. The
Yeah.
barrier is your willingness to abandon the comfortable, lazy mental habits that keep you average and to embrace the rigorous cognitive discipline required to engineer your own greatness.
We spent this entire conversation looking at the interior of individual brains, how a single CEO or a solitary athlete optimizes their neural pathways. But it leaves you with a fascinating question to consider as we wrap up.
What's that?
What happens if you apply these exact same principles, not just to a single brain, but to an entire group of people?
Oh, that's an interesting thought.
Right. If you can engineer an individual man to be anti-fragile, can a company, a family, or a community of men achieve a collective flow state? What does a first principles culture actually look like when scaled up?
That is the next frontier.
It is. That's something to think about as you decide what to do with the blueprints you've just been handed. Becoming a stronger man isn't about becoming perfect. It's about becoming more disciplined, more capable, and more in control of yourself. This may become masculine. Until next time, keep building.